Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter and publisher of TheBreaker.News, Bob Mackin. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, Parliamentary Ethics Committee held an emergency meeting to decide there's no need to talk to the Ethics Commissioner about the report he did on Prime Minister Trudeau breaking the law. The Liberal side kept repeating we were protecting 9,000 jobs. Has anyone ever been able to find out if that's a number that exists?
I think the SNC-Lavalin itself had knows about that number itself. But if you look at that number, that's 9,000 people. They're not working in a factory. They're skilled people, a lot of engineers, a lot of people who would go with the project, who would be snapped up by other companies pretty quickly. And in fact, some of my sources have told me that here in British Columbia, where SNC-Lavalin was bidding for the Pasella Bridge replacement project, and it was bidding to build the Millennium Line extension, the Broadway subway, it pulled out of those recently. One of the reasons why it pulled out is, well, it couldn't get the financing. The banks are starting to look at SNC-Lavalin in a negative fashion, but also they've lost a lot of people, and a lot of people who were at SNC-Lavalin in the last several years have gone elsewhere just because they've seen the writing on the wall that company may not get many more projects, and that company may not exist as it does today, may be sold off, further segmented, or maybe even go out of business. You never know what could happen with it. So some people at SNC-Lavalin have gone elsewhere. So is it really 9,000 jobs still? This 9,000 jobs, it's really, really misleading. It's not like a car factory, not like a General Motors factory where you do have certain numbers of people who may be laid off or replaced by automation. Those people are, in the factory, on the job, on the shift. But the people that work at SNC-Lavalin are people that are very skilled people who would go with the existing projects, go with bids. They'd find a way somehow, some way, to move along. And 9,000 jobs, if that's what the Liberals are talking about, they're really talking about several hundred jobs of their own, especially one job, one most important job, the job of Justin Trudeau. That's what they're really trying to protect. They're not really trying to protect SNC-Lavalin. And why should they be protecting SNC-Lavalin? Even though the company has said it has changed its ways and has gotten rid of a lot of the bad apples, how do we really know that? And shouldn't a judge decide the fate of this company based on these charges in Quebec over the corruption scandal? About a decade or so of incidents with regard to the relationship between SNC-Lavalin and Libya under the Gaddafi dictatorship. Some of those bribes even allegedly happened here in Canada, that the son of Gaddafi was wined and dined and supplied with escorts, even here in Vancouver. And there were people that were making decisions at that company and management on the board. And, well, we'll see if they are held accountable and are put on the stand and asked serious questions, and also given a chance themselves to say what was going on, to testify in their own defense. It's almost irrational that the Liberals would take that tact and just use the jobs to shield them. It may be something that is convenient for them in Quebec, where that message may sell, but the rest of Canada we're talking about here. And there's got to be a lot of people in Quebec who aren't terribly happy with what SNC-Lavalin did, and with other companies that were allowed to run amok for so many years that were eventually exposed to the Charbonneau Commission on corruption, for instance. And I do find it interesting that while this happens this week, last weekend Justin Trudeau was marching in another Pride Parade. This one was in Montreal. And the route of that Pride Parade took marchers straight past the SNC-Lavalin headquarters. So I've appealed to people on Twitter, on the Breaker News Twitter feed back earlier this week. I haven't had any responses yet, but if anyone out there in the listening audience may have been in Montreal last Sunday and may have gone to the Pride Parade and may have seen Justin Trudeau walk past the SNC-Lavalin headquarters, do you have any photos of Justin Trudeau with the SNC-Lavalin headquarters in the background? That would be a very interesting photo in this current environment.
I'm wondering if the Liberals were so arrogant at the ethics hearing because they've seen the latest polls that show no change since the ethics report that damned Trudeau was released.
Well, I mean, polls are polls these days, and as the politicians always say, the only one that really matters is the one on election day. It's a snapshot of an opinion of a certain set of respondents. You know, they do have scientific methods to try to extrapolate it onto the rest of the population, but I don't know. You can look at that in many different ways. One way is that perhaps all of those people already made their minds up months ago, and this didn't change their minds. Maybe a lot of Liberal voters have gone elsewhere, and maybe others who are staunch Conservatives, staunch Greens, staunch NDP are just standing pat. We don't quite know. But one thing we do know is that if we look at the events of the last week or so through a certain lens and compare it to what was going on in Justin Trudeau's travel schedule from late May to early to mid-August, well, I think we now know why Justin Trudeau is spending so much tax money and so much jet fuel to go all around the country, to go to photo ops and re-announcements of re-announcements, and to go to Cash for Access fundraisers, to on the public dime. He was doing it in a rush because he knew that this report would eventually be coming out. In fact, when he started his 10-day stretch of personal days in British Columbia, we believe he was somewhere in Tofino or Ucluelet. That is according to Mario Dayan's report, when Justin Trudeau received a draft copy of the report so he could comment on it. So he knew what was going on when he started that stretch. And, of course, he came out of his hibernation on July 29th. That's when I asked him about his travel spending, and especially the amount of times he'd come back to ports of British Columbia. I got a non-answer out of that. He wouldn't tell us how much he was actually spending, but if we look at that and analyze it, now we can understand what was going through the mind of Justin Trudeau and his spin doctors, that they knew that this was coming at them, and they wanted to make the most of it beforehand because they were worried that they'd lose support. And you never know, maybe they have lost support in their own internal polling. That's the other polling that matters too.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, are we seeing a division between people who've immigrated to Vancouver from Hong Kong, the pro-Chinese government, and the pro-democracy people actually clashing in Vancouver?
Well, we haven't seen a clash per se, but we did see a war of words, literal war of words outside the Broadway City Hall Canada Line station on August 17th. It was coinciding, funny enough, with the 10th anniversary of the Canada Line, which, coincidentally enough, the Canada Line was built and is still operated by SNC-Lavalin as part of a P3 arrangement. But put that aside, yeah, there was a protest that was scheduled by a group of people, maybe 200 people, who are supporting those in Hong Kong who've been marching en masse for the last couple or 3 months to push for more democracy in Hong Kong and to cancel this extradition bill to enable people to be extradited quicker from Hong Kong to China to face justice, or at least face charges in the Chinese justice system, which a lot of people say is not really a credible justice system. So this group scheduled this, and they were public about it, and they were met by counter-protesters. And this didn't just happen in Vancouver. This is happening in many other cities around the world, in Australia, in the U.S., in Canada. And it had all the earmarks of a rent-a crowd. The counter-protesters, that is. The Hong Kong people who were all dressed in black and had their own signs and flags, they were of multiple ages, whereas the counter-protest by this Chinese group was skewing very much younger, very much under 30. It seemed to be a lot of university students or that age, and turned out some of them also had very expensive cars. I shot a video, put it out there on the Breaker News Twitter feed of a fella in a convertible Mercedes with some of his friends. They pulled up into the disabled-only parking spot behind the Canada Line station in the Civic parking lot, and they proceeded to crank the stereo up loud, maybe to 11. And it was the March of the Volunteers, which is the Chinese national anthem, and they got a rise out of the crowd of protesters standing nearby, a lot of people wearing red, and with Chinese flags and with manufactured signs. It was really not a grassroots protest, and the people that I tried to talk to didn't seem to be willing to talk from their heart and from their mind. They all seemed to have very much a message that they had in many ways rehearsed, trying to be critical of Canada, or trying to compare Canada's situation with Hong Kong, trying to draw parallels between Hong Kong and Quebec. I mean, there have been some people in Hong Kong suggesting that Hong Kong should be independent, but a lot of people in Hong Kong really just want to maintain the two systems, one country policy that was promised them in the joint declaration when Great Britain agreed to hand Hong Kong back over to the Chinese, and the Chinese weren't going to maintain a one country, two systems regimen for 50 years after the 1997 handover, and it seems like China wants to accelerate things and doesn't want to wait 50 years until being able to have full control. So that's what the Hong Kong people are really protesting about. The Chinese group was also trying to shame the Hong Kong group because there has been some violence in these protests, but the violence, as much as it has received some international attention, because there were some shocking images. There were also some shocking images where protesters were attacked by people from triad groups, street gangs, organized crime groups in Hong Kong, and that wasn't their doing. They didn't ask for that. So the message from this pro-Chinese government group was trying to drown out the Hong Kongers. There was actually outnumbering happening. There were more of the pro-China group members there, and they were also positioned on kind of higher ground at the corner of Broadway and Cambie towards the Hong Kong group. The Hong Kong group stood firm. There was some fear. There was a lot of police there because there was some threats made on WeChat, the Chinese social media platform, of people that were talking about bringing weapons and maybe using the weapons to injure some of these Hong Kong democracy supporters. It didn't get to that, but there were some tense moments, and there was some vulgar language, mostly coming from the pro-China group. There was a protest later that the Hong Kong group had planned but abandoned at nighttime as the same group of pro-China protesters showed up in the Granville Mall outside the Nordstrom store, of all places, to do the same thing, wave the flag, shout some slogans, wave their signs, and sing the national anthem. And then there was another protest the next day outside the Chinese consulate on Granville Street in Shaughnessy. The pro-China group occupied the sidewalk directly in front of the consulate on the east side of the street, whereas the west side of the street, that was all for the Hong Kongers. The pro-China group had some help that day. It wasn't the supercars so much. It was work vehicles. There was a moving van. There were some trucks from some gardening and landscaping and construction companies that joined in and parked on that side of the street so that the Hong Kong protesters couldn't have a direct line of sight from with all the Chinese protesters, and so that also these trucks and their drivers could sit there and just honk their horns in support of the Chinese protesters. You know, there were vehicles parked on that side of Granville Street where there normally aren't vehicles parked. So that was kind of a shock for some people, but that protest was rather orderly and punctual. It didn't go on like the one did on Saturday afternoon. People started leaving, and many of the Hong Kong people, about 70 of them or so, decided to go to a church on the west side, not far from City Hall on 10th Avenue, a church called the 10th Church. There was a scheduled prayer meeting to pray for Hong Kong, for peace and justice in Hong Kong. And they went inside there, and I got a call and was told that this is what was happening. I better get over there and take a look. It was a surreal scene because there were about 100 of the protesters from the pro-China counter-protest who had gone and stood outside this church, essentially surrounded the church. And the street outside was closed by police. There might have been as many as 20 Vancouver police officers around the area. Some of them were guarding the doors. And it was just a rather surreal sight. The pro-China protesters weren't chanting or singing. They were still waving flags every once in a while, holding the signs, and some of them actually assembled in the back alley. And they were waiting for people to leave. They were, and when people did leave from this prayer meeting, many of them senior citizens, these pro-China protesters, many of them very young, were waving their flags and showing them their signs, and also taking photos and video of the people as they left under police escort. I talked to Chris Chu, who is one of the organizers of this prayer group, and he said this was blatant intimidation, bullying. That this was the pro-China group trying to shame the Hong Kong supporters who went for a prayer meeting, not a protest, to shame them. And he doesn't know what they're going to do with the images and the photos and the videos. He wonders if this group might be connected to the consulate, and if this group was gathering images for the consulate to hand over to the Chinese government. There's a lot of fear within even the Hong Kong community that China would be using their images for facial recognition software, for instance, to identify them, and maybe even try to find their families and harass their families. There's a lot of that fear going on in that immigrant community. So I reported from the scene very quickly via Twitter and produced a video, which you can see on the breaker.news. I went and asked some of these protesters from the pro-China group. Some of them were the same organizers from the day before, even though they denied they were organizing. Well, everything they were doing that I witnessed was in the classic definition of organizing and leading a group of people, to the point where this one woman was even telling her fellow protesters, "Do not talk to me. Do not answer my questions." I think they were just fearful of someone in the group telling the truth about what really was happening and who really ultimately is involved and in directing their protests. Brad West, the mayor of Port Coquitlam, has spoken out about this, but other politicians, we haven't heard from them. It was something that was unique in my career. I've been to various churches and other places of worship where there might be a political meeting, a nomination meeting for a provincial or federal party, for instance. Sometimes things can get heated there, but that's just among the group itself. But I can't recall at any time there being a protest of this sort against anyone who was on the inside of a church just praying, a prayer meeting. This was essentially people supporting the Chinese government trying to harm the rights, according to Chris Chu, harm the rights of people who are Canadians. And it seemed to be one of those one of those strange moments that you wonder how will the next protests proceed for those who are pro-China. the group that held this prayer meeting, well, they say they're going to have another prayer meeting, but they just don't know where and when. Meanwhile, the senior pastor of the 10th Church, Ken Shigematsu, talked to him. He said he's very supportive of the prayer meetings and hope they will hold another prayer meeting at his church, because he believes that it's a positive thing. That, as he said, quoting Martin Luther King Jr., that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. So this I think is a new moment, and it coincides with a lot of other things, including the announcement by social media companies like Facebook and Twitter that they found hundreds of thousands of fake accounts, all leading back to China to spread misinformation on the social media platforms. This is the environment that we're living under as we also get closer to the federal election, but also as we get closer to October 1st, which is the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And even sooner than that is the Union of BC Municipalities Convention, where several of the politicians, led by Brad West, have said that they're going to boycott the China reception, and are calling on the others to boycott the China reception as well, because of the country's human rights record. And still we have 2 Canadians who are in jail, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, in retaliation for the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive, last December.
Do you think Canada's security agency should investigate this? Does this seem like this is the work of Chinese spies?
I believe they already are. They've already written reports. CSIS has already written reports that were made public last year warning of foreign influence. Way back when, almost 10 years ago, Richard Fadden was the director of CSIS, and he spoke of it, of foreign influence, especially here in British Columbia. And if we look at what's happening right now and where we're going to this fall, it makes the 2016 Russia influence on the U.S. federal election look perhaps like child's play. Because here in Canada and in other countries where there's large Chinese populations, there's quite an organized network of business groups and cultural groups under the banner of what's called the United Front Work Department, which is actually an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, which works to influence foreign diaspora, the Chinese populations in various parts of the world, in strategic centers, and Vancouver is one of those strategic centers. A very important seaport, airport with a very large Chinese community, and very large business interests here as well. So, unlike 2016 in the U.S., where you basically had a handful of Russians who appear to have been connected to the Russian government, as some intelligence reports say, the Russian population of the United States is much less per capita than the Chinese population in Canada. And especially in recent immigration trends, there have been more coming from mainland China, very wealthy, very well educated, as well as, speaking Mandarin instead of Cantonese, which is the language spoken in Hong Kong. So there definitely is a renewed concern, and it would have woken up some of those in Ottawa and the offices that need to care when Facebook and Twitter decided this week to shut down so many accounts and also release some of that data. That right now there was a misinformation campaign aimed at trying to undermine the pro-Hong Kong supporters. Well, it's very simple for that same group in China to turn on a different campaign and decide to try to influence the Canadian election. A lot is at stake because one thing is happening here. We've got Meng Wanzhou on bail living in Shaughnessy, and China will do whatever it can to try to get her back. They're doing whatever they can through the law courts here in a very slow fashion, but they don't want to wait. And there's a lot at stake here, and you never know that if they could use some of those same techniques, misinformation campaigns on social media, to try to change the course of the federal election here. You certainly do see some of the people who are involved in the United Front Work Department, people who do go to Beijing quite often and attend Chinese government events. Many of those people here in Vancouver, including the head of the Chinese Benevolent Association, including the head of the Canadian Alliance of Chinese Associations, CACA, the heads of those organizations are regularly going to major Chinese government events in Beijing, and they're also spending a lot of time hosting our politicians at banquets here and at events here. They're just definitely using an effort to lobby them and to influence them, and we'll see how much success they have or how much they get involved in the federal election, if they're actually going to be donating money to any candidates or volunteering on any campaigns. It's something where we've got to keep an eye on, not just in social media, but the rest of society, the rest of the whole election equation of some of these interests that we can rightly question their loyalty to Canada.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, is there a Surrey connection to the university admissions scandal?
There might be. There is a Los Angeles Times report this week that a woman named Xiaoning Shui from the Vancouver area, they use those words, the Vancouver area, allegedly paid $100,000 U.S. bribe to get her son on the University of California, Los Angeles soccer team, men's soccer team. However, her son had no experience playing competitive soccer, but this was allegedly part of the Operation Varsity Blues, the college admissions scandal, quote-unquote, side door scheme that Rick Singer hatched to get the sons and daughters of very rich people into United States universities with very little effort except for the big money. This woman has not been charged, Xiaoning Shui, not been charged for some reason, but there is a connection there because the coach of the UCLA men's soccer team is one of those who was charged. He's fighting the charges, but the prosecutors are confident they've got enough evidence to possibly get a conviction in this case. So we've got the situation here where this could be the second person in British Columbia who is implicated in this whole scandal, although one so far is only charged, and that's David Sadu, the stock market wheeler dealer and former CFL football player, who is charged with spending six figures to get his sons into two colleges in California by hiring a genius from Florida to fly up to British Columbia to write the exams for them. So this situation, new situation, according to the LA Times, of this woman in the Vancouver area, I was able to find in court files a Xiaoning Shui in Surrey. And she is, in small claims court files, alleged, along with her husband, to have not paid for the car, the 2014 BMW, which they were borrowing from a company which does quote so-called car subscription service. That they are being sued for almost $23,000 by this company because they essentially wrecked a BMW. They only paid a certain amount for a damage deposit, but the insurance apparently was deemed void because of the way that the car was being driven. So these two people, Xiaoning Shui and her husband, both live in Surrey, although separate addresses, but on this court document, the small claims court document, they do share the same phone number. I've tried that phone number. It appears to be a cell phone number, and it has a not available reporting on it. I've tried it several times, and it doesn't accept messages. But I believe that this is the same shouting shui, and if proven otherwise, I'll change it, of course. But shouting shui, that's the only one I could find in the Lower Mainland, and one in Surrey who could be someone that is suspected of spending a very big amount to get her son on a soccer team, which he never belonged on, in order for him to study at UCLA. The question might be is, how did she find out about this whole scheme? Did she find out about it through David Sadu or anyone else? We'll hopefully find out more about that in the months to come. One thing is, though, that David Sadu, his next court date is October 2nd for a case status management hearing. He doesn't necessarily have to be at that hearing. He can send his lawyers. We might learn more there, but by October 2nd, that'll be at least 3 months of them having full access to the disclosure documents to know exactly what the prosecutors gathered on David Sadu. And we'll see if there's any decision by David Sadu and his defense team whether to ask for a trial to fight the charges, or if they might do as many others have who've been charged under this scheme, to negotiate a plea agreement, a plea bargain. Anyone's guess as to what happens, but it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Were Canadian immigration officials at Hastings horse racing track in Vancouver?
Yeah, there was intrigue at the racetrack on August 19th, Monday morning, that a couple dozen agents from Canada Border Services Agency, assisted by the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch, which regulates horse racing in BC, showed up at the racetrack after 6 a.m., bright and early, and they apparently arrested or rounded up a couple dozen people who work in the backstretch, people that work in the stables with the horses, grooms, who are the ones who clean and brush the horses. They clean the stalls, they feed the horses, they do menial work, but very important work to care for the horses. And a lot of them were Latinos, and the Border Services Agency decided to round them up. And on August 21st, there were 7 of them that appeared at the Immigration and Refugee Board. They had been incarcerated for 48 hours, and it was the first step of the check and balance, essentially, for them to go before the Immigration and Refugee Board and asked to be released, and for the Immigration and Refugee Board to hear from the government side to ask them to justify why they were arrested and why they should be kept. This is rather unusual. I couldn't find anyone that's I can remember anything like this ever happening before at Hastings Racecourse or in any racetrack here in BC. The interesting part is the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch licenses all workers at the track. They're gambling workers. They have to be licensed. They can't just walk off the street and say, "Hey, I want to brush the horses for a certain amount of dollars an hour." They are people who have to first go through the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch application process to get licensed. So the question might be is, why wasn't the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch ensuring that the people they were licensing were properly able to work here in Canada? That's a serious question that we haven't had an answer on yet, and I think that it's incumbent upon David Eby, the Attorney General, to answer that. He hasn't been available yet, and his press office is saying that while the investigation goes on, talk to CBSA, and GPEB won't comment on it. CBSA itself has not really wanted to comment at all. They've not been terribly helpful in explaining how many were arrested. They did refer people to the IRB, and the IRB has actually been the one that released the names of those who were arrested and who were set for these hearings. So this is going to be an interesting one to find out how this came about and how people, in the federal government decided to act upon this, and why the racetrack of all places. Might there be others in other areas of the economy, perhaps even further up the chain in the economy, higher ranking people with higher incomes. Why are they going after low-paid workers at a horse race track? It's a very interesting one, and it's a developing story. We'll see where it goes.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin and publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.